Hello, it's Vanessa Vollum again, president of CPI. Today's video is a follow-up to last week's video, which was about agencies in emergency mode due to the COVID-19 recession. In today's video, I'll be focusing on agencies in the priority category, those with 2 to 3 months of cash in the bank. Last week, I talked about COVID-19 a whole bunch, so I won't go too deep into that today. Instead, I want to touch on some updated economic news. Unfortunately, it looks like some of our worst economic fears are likely to come true. Over the past few weeks, a deep recession has come to be accepted as the inevitable economic price of slowing the advance of COVID-19. So what does that mean for us? As you can see from this article that came out just a few days ago from The Economist, manufacturing took a significant hit, but the services industry as a whole was decimated. The numbers are staggeringly bad, and they predict a recession every bit as bad as the financial crisis of 2008 and probably worse. And March is only the beginning. Economists are already predicting far, far steeper declines in second quarter GDP. And if you recall from my last video, the 2008 recession, which is the shortest we've had in 100 years, lasted only 6 years. The one we're facing today is already predicted to be worse. So let's talk about how you can prepare. As I mentioned in the last video, I discussed the concept of triage in an agency environment and specifically discussed what you should do if you find your agency in the emergency category with only 1 month of cash in the bank. This week, I will be focusing on the priority agencies, which thankfully means you have 2 to 3 months of cash in the bank. However, since the economic picture is extremely fluid, it's critical to prepare your agency now so you don't slip into that emergency category. So let's get to it. With only 2 to 3 months of cash in the bank and the high potential of losing clients or work, the first step you need to take is to analyze how productive your employees are so you can determine if and where you need to make labor cuts. So how do you know who to cut? The best way to do this is to review your employees' utilizations. If you're not familiar, utilization is the measurement of billable hours performed on client work over total available hours for a given period. This is a metric used to determine how productive your team members are, specifically on billable work. Your financial model should be built off of target utilizations for each billable employee. Therefore, you need to be looking at this metric to see who is exceeding, hitting, or not meeting their target utilizations. If your employees aren't reaching their targets, that means you may be overstaffed and paying people to do non-billable work, or worse than that, sit around unproductive. If you find employees are not hitting their target utilizations because they're working on internal initiatives, you need to determine if you can afford to keep these employees working on those initiatives right now. If these initiatives do not have a direct impact on landing new business or helping you manage through this crisis, I would highly recommend putting them on hold. If you put these initiatives on hold, it will require you to determine if you have enough billable work for these employees to take on, or if this is headcount you may need to cut. For those employees who don't have enough billable work, you may have to rethink how you execute work in this new reality. While it's not ideal, you may have to blend roles in order to meet utilization targets to get you through this crisis. For example, if you find multiple employees who are only hitting half of their target utilizations, you should determine whether that workload can be moved to just one person or redistributed across the team to alleviate this extra headcount, or possibly even outsourced and made a variable cost. You may also have extremely low utilizations on your department heads and managers. It may not be an option anymore for these employees to not be billable. Right now, the focus needs to be on executing work, not necessarily on planning the strategic growth of the company, which is where many managers and leaders spend significant amounts of non-billable time. Your department heads should be at least 50% billable through this crisis. If you have department heads or managers who are unwilling to be billable, this may be the time to let them move on. In this new reality, you can't afford pure overhead employees unless they're in accounting or new business. Larger agencies may also have legitimate overhead employee needs in HR and IT. However, it's still important to analyze these departments to ensure they're not overstaffed or too big of a burden for the agency to carry. While utilization is a very critical metric, the other side of the equation is realization, or how much billable work is actually being billed back to clients. I found that while many agencies struggle with a utilization gap, just as many agencies, if not more, struggle with a realization gap. Some agencies can have a realization gap of as much as 30 to 40% of their billable work, meaning they're only getting paid for 60 to 70% of the total work they're producing. The real problem here is that these agencies have to staff to their realization gap even though they're not getting paid. Basically, they're paying people to do work they're not getting paid for. And even worse, they have likely set client expectations that they will continue to produce this level of work for significantly less pay, which means reducing a realization gap is very difficult. First things first, you need to be measuring your realization gap. If you're using an integrated agency management tool, it's easy to manage and categorize all over budget transactions that are unable to be billed back to clients. Some technologies even allow you to tag these with a reason code so you can see a breakdown of the gross opportunity cost and easily determine an appropriate solution. If you do not have an integrated technology, you can still manually calculate your realization gap by comparing the total billed amount for each completed project to the total actual gross in transactions. If your total actual gross transactions are greater than your total amount billed, this equals the realization gap on your project. Then you can calculate your gap for all completed projects client by client. While it may be difficult to break this realization gap down perfectly, you should still be able to use your gut to take your best guess at the reasons for the overage. Now, some of the reasons making up your realization gap are initiated from within your agency, like misscoping or overservicing and overdelivering. And some are initiated from your clients, like out-of-scope requests that you don't change order. I recommend initially focusing on tackling the misscoping and overservicing and overdelivering issues, since these are the things you have more control over internally. When it comes to scoping, if you don't have this already, I highly recommend making sure you have an agency advocate involved in your scoping and estimating process for both new business and existing client development. This is typically a very senior project manager or production manager who is very experienced in how the work gets done. Having this agency advocate involved in the process will help you ensure your SOWs and pricing are set up for success from the very beginning. If your projects are not properly scoped, you're guaranteed to increase your realization gap and lower your agency's profitability. When tackling your overservicing and overdelivering issues, I recommend sitting down with your department heads and managers to reinforce the need to stay in scope and not spin their wheels. During this crisis, we can't afford to give our clients filet for the price of burger. This doesn't mean that you won't produce filet type work for the clients that are willing to pay. It just means we don't have the luxury of overservicing and overdelivering for clients who are unwilling to pay for that level of quality. After addressing the internally focused reasons, I recommend creating a good change order discipline. This will allow you to bill your clients for their out-of-scope requests and or curb their behavior from requesting them. The more you address and minimize all these areas of your realization gap, the fewer people you will have to cut because you'll actually be getting paid for the work that you're doing. Both utilization and realization are the main factors affecting department profitability. If you are not currently measuring department profitability, you can combine utilization and targets for all employees in a specific department to determine how far that department is from its utilization target, and therefore how much headcount may need to be cut or moved to part-time temporarily. If you're using an integrated system and managing realization at the transaction level, you should easily be able to see how realization is affecting each department's profitability. Tackling your realization gap will likely bring up profitability across all departments. One critical thing to note here, not all realization gaps at the department level are controlled by that department. For example, misscoping and out-of-scope requests are things the department still has to execute on, even though they may not have been involved when the commitments were made. In addition, not all departments are supposed to produce the same amount of profit, and many agencies carry loss leader departments. These tend to be unprofitable departments that the agency has invested in for a strategic reason, often in an effort to market as a more full-service agency or to control the quality of that type of work. In my experience, digital and video departments inside of full-service agencies tend to be the hardest to keep consistently utilized and often have high realization gaps. It's time to look long and hard at all your departments and determine if they can become profitable or if you need to make them a variable cost and actually outsource the work. Keep in mind, there are some departments that are much easier to outsource than others. I do not recommend outsourcing client services or project management unless it's a former employee who is already up to speed on your processes. Alternatively, it is substantially easier to outsource things like design, copy, digital development, proofreading, video production, and even some research and brand strategy expertise. Making these a variable cost can help you manage the ups and downs of production through these tough times and allow you to strategically build them back up over time based on demand. Some agencies might choose to continue using freelancers and contractors to flex with demand versus rehiring and lowering department utilizations. In addition to measuring department profitability, we should also be looking at project type profitability. You may have certain project types with such a high realization gap that it doesn't make sense to keep executing or even selling that type of work anymore. This may be an opportunity to restructure the agency and work with a partner or white label a partner who can better execute that work. While this eliminates the revenue, it also allows you to eliminate all costs associated with this type of work. And if you're lucky, you may be able to make a little markup on your outsourcing. So after looking at your department and project type profitability, your next step should be to look at the profitability of each of your clients. Hopefully you already have this best practice of reviewing your client profitability monthly. However, if you don't, now is the time to start. The goal of this analysis is not to determine which clients to sunset, although if you have a client with negative profitability, that might be something to consider. But rather, the goal is to determine what is dragging the profitability of certain clients down and to develop an action plan with your client services team to address those issues over time. To determine your client profitability, you need to know by client total billings and/or revenue recognition, total cost of goods sold, total labor cost for time entry on billable and non-billable projects, and the appropriate overhead allocation for that specific period. If you have an integrated tool, this should be pretty easy. However, if you don't, this can be calculated manually, but may take a bit of effort. Even if you don't have client profitability detail, you can still discuss the top factors that reduce client profitability and address them with your clients based on your gut feelings. So what are those top factors reducing client profitability? Well, first is your realization gap, which we just talked about. Some of this can be addressed by better managing your internal processes and avoiding over-servicing and over-delivering. In addition, it's more important than ever to teach your clients how to work with you more efficiently and to control out-of-scope client requests. In addition to the realization gap, which are billable hours not being billed back to clients, there are also non-billable hours logged to clients for a variety of reasons, typically relationship building, scoping, estimating, RFPs, or pitch time. Hopefully you don't have too much of this time, but either way, you should be looking at this time as investment labor. You may or may not have the luxury of making that investment in time right now, unless the probability of the payoff is relatively high. If so, this work should result in additional business within your accounts in the near future. However, if this non-billable client time is not paying off, then it's just reducing your employees' productivity in addition to their department's profitability and the overall client profitability. To be clear, this is totally worth the effort and worth the investment if it pays off. I don't want anybody to think that you shouldn't invest in your clients. But when you're in a cut deep and restructure situation, you have to look at all inputs that may or may not be paying off. The next factor is your unreimbursable expenses. Similar to your non-billable client time, these expenses are investments made to the client knowing you are never going to be paid back. The most common unreimbursable expenses are travel and meals. These may have automatically stopped at the moment. However, for some agencies, if these aren't watched, they can be a big drain on client profitability. Our last factor that drives down client profitability is a low negotiated rate card. Unfortunately, there's not much you're going to be able to do about this at this stage unless your contract is coming up for renewal. However, if you do have a client with a negative profitability where the major cause is the negotiated rate, not our other three reasons we just discussed, this is when you should consider sunsetting the account, especially if it's forcing you to keep employees yet not paying you enough to cover them. Believe it or not, there are some client relationships that are so unprofitable that you'd be better off writing them a check and walking away. I've seen it. So now that you've done all this analysis, your next step should be to scrutinize your OpEx budget and eliminate anything unnecessary or renegotiate what you can. The reality is that you might not have the luxury of providing some of the employee perks that you did before if you're going to get through this crisis. But if communicated honestly and with integrity, I believe your employees will understand the cuts you need to make here. Some OpEx cuts will happen naturally in this remote environment, like office supplies, kitchen and staff room supplies, or even free beer Fridays. However, you may need to add back some expenses to ensure your team can effectively work remotely, like additional remote conferencing logins or digital markup and routing tools to keep work moving through this new remote shop. Next, you need to understand your new reality from a revenue perspective. You've probably already been on the phone with your clients figuring out what this new world means for them and their marketing efforts, what initiatives they're moving forward with and what they're putting on hold and what they're canceling altogether. If you have agency of record relationships, you probably have better insight into what's happening with your clients and may even be helping them replan the remainder of the year based on what they know at this time. This will definitely give you a leg up when it comes to revenue projections for this client. For those of you managing project or campaign-based clients, this may be more difficult. Your clients may go dark on you and put everything on hold until they've replanned and determined what their new needs are. This is the time to leverage the good client relationships and partnerships you've built over the years to gain insights into how this is going to affect your agency. Once you gather this information, you need to translate these insights into updated revenue and cost of goods sold projections for your agency. If you can get enough detailed information from your clients, I'd recommend breaking these revenue forecasts down by department. In addition, if you know the average previous realization gap for each client, you need to ensure you reforecast your work inclusive of a new projected realization gap. While you may be able to eliminate some of this realization gap, the likelihood that you'll bring it down to zero is nil since you've already set client expectations for this level of service. You may not be getting paid for this work, but you're still going to have to produce it. And that's important to know and will help you tremendously when you need to make headcount decisions in the near future. Don't be too conservative in these projections, but this is not the time to be overly optimistic either. You're going to use this data to make some tough decisions. So the more accurate the data is, the better decisions you'll be able to make. So once you've gone through this, the exercises above, you need to take these inputs and build a new financial model for the remainder of 2020. When I say financial model, I'm not talking about a short-term cash flow outlook, but rather an accrual-based forecasted monthly P&L based on new inputs of revenue and COGS, new target utilizations and direct labor costs, new indirect labor costs, and updated operating expenses. If you don't already have a financial model or don't know how to build one, check out part 3 of our 2020 recession video series over on YouTube for a detailed breakdown of how to build one for your agency. Revising your 2020 financial model isn't an exercise in finding efficiencies. This is way bigger than that. If you were going to rebuild your agency with the new forecast that you have, what would it look like? You may no longer have the luxury to keep that non-profitable department or the same number of non-billable managers that you currently have, or to keep working on all the same non-billable internal initiatives. Remember, this is about cutting deep and restructuring. You're going to need to think outside the box here and make some tough decisions. Once you've laid in your revenue and COGS forecasts with your projected realization gaps, you will know exactly how much work will need to be produced, and hopefully you'll know that by department. From here, we'll move to the direct labor side to determine how many and what type of headcount we need to produce that work. There are 2 types of labor cuts that you need to consider when replanning your direct labor into this financial model. The first group is the employees who were not meeting their utilization targets prior to this crisis. Honestly, this is the fact that you've probably been carrying along for a while. The second group is the employees related to the substantial decrease in revenue that your new forecast is likely showing, or possibly the change in the type of services your clients are requesting at this time. When you are restructuring and putting the chess pieces back on the board, you need to be open to doing work differently while maintaining your operational best practices. Don't go wild, wild west or throw the baby out with the bathwater here, but keep the good, rework the okay, and eliminate the bad ways of doing things. In order to match the new headcount to the projected revenue, you'll need to reestablish target utilizations and average gross rates for all the chess pieces you're putting back on the board. This will help you determine exactly how many people you need to do the work in your projected revenue, including your forecasted realization gap. If these don't align, then you risk understaffing and burning out your remaining team members, or possibly overstaffing and burning through your months of cash faster, putting your agency at even greater financial risk. Once you flow in your new OpEx numbers, you will have a net operating income forecast by month. You can also vet your financial model by applying some industry KPIs like AGI, or agency gross income, or net revenue per FTE, or salary to AGI ratios. Throughout this crisis, we're not looking to hit best practice KPIs or rockstar net income percentages. This is a time to be realistic. However, the closer you can get to these numbers, the more financially stable you will be in this very unstable world. It's very likely that you're going to need to build back up your cash reserve once you come out the other side. But if you cut deep and restructure now, you should be able to avoid sliding into the emergency category and might even move up into the non-urgent category where you can thrive in this environment. Now that you've done all the work to determine what needs to happen with your headcount, it's time to take the uncomfortable step of letting people go. Trust me, I know how difficult this is. But during these unprecedented times with only 2 to 3 months of cash in the bank, it's a necessary part of cutting deep and restructuring. Now, this could mean a variety of things. It could mean laying people off temporarily with the intention of hiring them back when the crisis ends. It could mean temporarily moving full-time employees to hourly or part-time, or it could even mean laying people off permanently. With the federal relief packages being discussed, there will be a lot of options out there for both employers and employees to get through this difficult time. So be sure to contact your payroll or HR company to find out what benefits may apply to help your employees. One to look into is the Federal Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which allows employees to get paid sick time up to a certain number of hours for a time they are unable to work given the situation, as well as gives employers a tax credit for this time, keeping the employee whole while reducing the overall burden on the organization. This relief package allows employers to continue paying employees so they don't need to file for unemployment, and it allows you to have the right team members on staff when you're ready to ramp up again. I highly recommend you do your own research on this, and I also anticipate additional options in further stimulus packages. As I mentioned in the emergency category video, whatever you need to do, it's critical that you do it with integrity and honesty. This process is tough and it's going to be a hit to your culture. Do not take the death by 1,000 cuts approach to these changes. Once you've determined your new reality, take swift action and make sure you present your new restructured vision to the remaining organization as soon as possible. Your people will need vision and strength from you as a leader to inspire and guide them through these difficult times. The one consistent thing I have noticed over my consulting career is that agency leadership is never in alignment. Everyone on the leadership team has their own perspectives of what to fix and how to fix it. But they need a unifying force of good, actionable data so they can gain consensus, build a reasonable plan, and then work together to execute. This is more important than ever right now. You need to get everyone in the boat, all rowing in the same direction at the same time in order to get through this crisis. So how do you get everyone aligned? Good question. While your gut instincts have gotten you this far, it's only the right combination of data and gut that's going to get you where you want to be. If you've been using data to supplement your decision so far, kudos to you. This step may be much easier for you to embrace. However, if you've never used or trusted your data before, there's no better time than now to start. I've already discussed some of the most important metrics, including employee productivity, agency realization, client profitability, department profitability, and project type profitability. But none of them are valuable without good inputs. It's more important than ever that you get good inputs to your system in order to produce good data to analyze. Remember, garbage in, garbage out. Unfortunately, when most agencies get extra busy or go through a period of duress, they often don't prioritize the critical inputs, things like daily time entry, proper non-billable time tracking, realization gap tracking by reason code, deferred revenue management, proper gap matching. When you effectively manage these critical inputs, you will be able to answer the tough questions you are facing right now, whether they align with your gut or are counterintuitive. Having good data at your fingertips versus having to spend days or weeks crunching numbers to get it allows you to make the right decisions quickly. The agencies who have this data and have been reviewing this data monthly are in a much better position to act quickly and make these difficult decisions. Often, in times of crisis, when decisions are made based on gut feelings alone, it can be very difficult to align your leadership teams with your strategy. While they may follow your lead initially, you may lack the buy-in or follow-through for your plan to truly be effective. At the end of the day, this lack of buy-in and follow-through may sink the ship. If you don't already have the tools to track and measure this data, this should be on your short list. Okay, we're almost there. You've analyzed your data, you've rebuilt the 2020 financial model, you've made the tough decisions to cut deep and restructure. Now what? During these uncertain times, it's critical to create a strategic plan that your agency can execute against to get through this crisis. It's time to throw all your previous strategic plans out the window. None of them matter. While Webster would say that strategy is a careful plan or stratagem, I would argue that strategy is really the art of sacrifice. It's a choice between alternatives in the service of a desired outcome. With our fixed pie of limited resources, this is really a zero-sum game. Every decision that we make takes away from something else. How many of you have built a strategic plan for your agency and missed the mark by 30% or more? I bet the answer is most of you. Most leadership teams create plans based on their desired goals for the agency without a true picture of what it takes to get there or an understanding of their fixed resources. I recommend a different way of planning called the minimum winning game. The minimum winning game was developed by a professor at Stanford's Graduate School of Business and was originally intended as a framework to help startups achieve funding milestones. It challenges the leadership teams to identify the minimum set of activities to achieve success, forcing them to remove all extraneous goals, distractions, and nice-to-haves that we love to include in our plans. Doing this properly leaves no room for excuses for leadership to not execute on the plan. There are likely priorities, goals, and/or initiatives that no longer meet the criteria to be in your minimum winning game. Your goals should be reasonable to hit, yet large enough that success provides a foundation for continued long-term growth. This will force your team to focus on these critical success factors and will provide a lighthouse during these rough seas. So we've just hit you with a ton of information and you're probably a bit overwhelmed, but don't panic. Remember, you're still in the 2 to 3 month of cash category. As we know, panicking puts your body in fight or flight, which turns off the reasoning side of your brain and makes doing all the things that you need to do right now so much harder, if not impossible. To be honest, it actually makes you dumber. In this case, quantity is not quality, and putting in more hours when you are panicked and not able to make good decisions will not benefit you, your team, or your agency. So take a moment for yourself. Do what you need to do to get into a good place that allows you to make sound decisions. I believe in you. You have got this. The business world likely will never be the same, and that's okay. In this new economy that's going to emerge, you have the opportunity to completely remake your organization and emerge stronger, faster, and more profitable. But you need to cut deep and restructure right now in order to make this pivot. I really hope this has been helpful for you as we all navigate through this unprecedented time together. Next, I'll be back with a video for the non-urgent triage category, those agencies with 4 to 6 months of cash in the bank who have an opportunity to thrive in this landscape. I'll say it again, stay healthy and wash your hands.